Ready to go live? Yes. There we are. Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday. Happy almost Independence Day.
Happy almost Independence Day. Absolutely. Well, good morning, friends and family, and welcome to another Saturday morning coffee and conversation on the If You Could See Me Project Facebook page. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to my guest this morning, my very good friend, Rob Targos. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Happy to be here.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great.
Good. So before we get started, tell us about your shirt.
So the shirt, which you and I have been involved with, so it's based on the I am principle of, I think, Maddie Stepanek. And so he's a poet that wrote over 100 poems on disabilities, and then we ended up doing a couple projects together with using his poetry.
Yeah. Yeah. So a few years ago, we were involved with the Kesem Theater Project over at the Weinstein JCC in Richmond. And that poem, which Maddie Stepanek wrote on 9/11, like as things were unfolding, one of those hundreds of poems that he wrote. It just was this perfect sort of collection. Good morning, Kimberly. This perfect collection of thoughts and ideas and wisdom. And he was this 13-year-old boy who lived with muscular dystrophy, and he inspired this amazing theater piece that we did, and then we created those shirts. So I am was inspired from that, but I love that you wore that today. I wish I had known you were going to do that, so I would have worn mine. I would have worn mine too. So yeah, happy it's July 3rd, and it's almost Independence Day. I have to tell everybody that, it's interesting. I am sitting here in my new home in Portland, Oregon, waiting impatiently for my entire family to make it here today. They'll be here in a few hours. And I've had a level of independence, freedom, as it were, over the last month that I haven't had in 20 years. I have been a parent for almost 18 years. My husband and I have been together for over 20 years. And I've been here alone for all intents and purposes. And it's been weird. It's been really quiet, and there's been some positives about that, but it's also just been very, very weird. And I don't mind being alone, but I like being with my people, right? And so,
What's one thing that you learned about yourself being alone over this time, and one negative and one positive? Let's start there. I don't want to flip the script, but there it is.
A positive is that, I can live, alone and get it all done, and, keep things running, and, doing all of that. And it's been a very, very long time since I've been met with that. And honestly, I've never lived alone. I lived with my parents, and then I always had roommates, and then, my husband and I moved in together. So I never had the total independence of living entirely by myself. And it's not fully, it would be disingenuous for me to say that I am doing it all alone, because, I do have a partner. He's just not here yet. right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
we're still sharing some of the responsibilities, but in terms of the, the sort of day-to-day management of life, um, I I I've been doing okay, you know. And a negative would probably be that I have watched a lot of television over the last month. Um, and I think some of that is a function of, being completely exhausted, having, done this marathon move and, then driven all the miles across the country in only 3 days to get here. Those were nearly 20-hour days. And so, you know, just the sort of uh, malaise and exhaustion. And as is always true for me, it's never not true. I don't allow myself opportunities to rest or opportunities to do nothing, or I have that sort of inner drive that says if you're not doing something productive, then you're not worthy of being alive. And I've come a long way in all of these years of personal work, but it's still hard. That voice is still there. um so yeah.
I think that's something that we share, in that if if I feel like I'm being idle, I'm not being productive, and
Right.
then I question too, what am I doing with my life for the last 5 minutes, for the last 10 minutes?
Right, exactly. What am I doing with my life? Because
And
go ahead.
yeah, so it's just it's and I think that's a good place to start, because that's it's really about the thinking process, and how even the thinking process that you have, and the identity that someone has as I am.
You just froze up. Are you there? Rob?
That your thought process is.
Are you there? Hello?
Yep.
We totally froze up.
Okay.
So, we were gone for a little while. I'm sorry.
No, no, that's right. Um, so what I was saying was that I think that's where the thought process is a good place to start. Just as far as, like, that's where independence and thinking about yourself and your identity and I am
Mm-hmm.
really starts from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have the 6 T's, which is one of the acronyms that I've always used and developed, which is think, trust, tool, try, test, and train. And the joke is that I go from zero to 6T, in when I start my day, or how, and so those are kind of the steps that I go through in trying to think about not only what I'm going to accomplish today, but what I'm going to do, the routines that I'm going to use, and I think so much of that gets interrupted by different experiences that we've had, and it also gets interrupted by some of the personal beliefs, and um, trauma issues that we've both had, and it's really interesting to start with something, and even the first word of the Declaration of Independence is declaration. It's literally like real information in a way that for independence. And they
Are you there, Rob? I can't tell if it's you that's freezing up or if it's me that's freezing up. I've never had this issue. Yeah, I think it's you now that I'm watching it on Facebook.
okay.
Okay. Hang on. You can see me. You can hear me listening back to this broadcast on Facebook. Okay, so all right, let's just try again. So I apologize. It's never happened before. So thought process. Declare. So how we declare our own independence, I think, has a sort of modicum of elements associated with it, because I totally agree with you that we are required to have a certain mindset, as it were, right? Like the ways that we think about ourselves and the world and all of that. And so I think we can break this conversation up into sort of like, what's my part? Like, what am I responsible for with these 6 T's, which I just typed into the chat for anybody who wants to, refer back to that. What am I going to do? And then, what does the world also need to do? And I realize we can't control other people, but, like, I'm proposing questions about what is an ideal situation. You know what I mean?
And literally we can speak it into the world. Whether the world listens or whether the world really hears us, that's something else, or what message they take, or how they interpret what we're saying based on political beliefs or personal beliefs, and religious beliefs, for example. It then gets interpreted based on the way we speak, or what another person's responsibility is in the world, or in the situation. And it's interesting just to know how people sometimes just misinterpret or disinterpret the information, it's it's based on things from family history, or people who are conservative don't think that people with disabilities, for example, that because they're on government assistance, that they're not valued from a financial standpoint as much, because their success is more uh, based on support of the system.
Right.
And but at the same time, if we prescribe, and you and I have talked about this, if we prescribe to that, then we're supporting the same dysfunctional and broken system that people, and really keeping the existing system or the broken system functioning in a way that it shouldn't function.
Mm-hmm. So tell me how, how does this manifest, this sort of global conversation manifest in your own experience?
The way that it manifests in my own experience is that I grew up in the 1970s. I was born in the 1970s and grew up in the 80s and 90s before the ADA, and I was expected to just prepare and then practice and perform and conform to everybody else's standards and
Mm-hmm.
go upstairs, do things that other people just did naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I had to develop both physically, emotionally, and in other ways to handle, you know, 500 other kids that didn't have a disability.
Right.
And
And so can we just because, there are people listening who will not will not know you, can you talk a little bit about what your disability is and, how that affects the things that you were just talking about, having been expected to do?
I have cerebral palsy, and I uh, I was born 2 months prematurely with spinal meningitis, and I was in the hospital for two born 2 months prematurely, and I spent 6 weeks in intensive care. And something that I didn't even know um, until 40 years later was I had a stroke when I was born. And so whether it was um, whether it was kept from my parents, or whether it was um, by the doctors, or whether it was kept from me because of the um, of the medical reasons, everything that I did wasn't about my disability. It was about a shortcoming, or how I didn't work hard enough. And if I just worked harder, that things would just be better. So it was always expected for me to just um, practice and perform to the standards, to ability standards that I really never could. And probably the principal way that I've coped with that is an understanding of oxymorons in language, where I use my cerebral and my thought against the policy, and using my disability devices, my crutches, as ways to navigate the world. And then I was expected to perform and do things that people with disabilities normally wouldn't do. And even having my crutches taken away while I was using them as a kid, that was one of the traumatic um, issues, because then it was a matter of uh, well, how can you take away my crutches, because my parents didn't always like to see that I had a disability.
Right.
And even at even at home, for example, my bedroom was upstairs, and we had a basement and I had a bedroom upstairs, so I always had to go up and down stairs. Even at home, there was no accessible entrance. So
Right.
it was everybody else knew, and it was obvious that I had a disability. But even over the last 3 or 4 months, there have been some family members that have finally admitted that they had to pretend that I didn't have a disability, and that it was not necessarily a collusion, but it was a collaboration
Right.
between family members, that so that they perpetuated a misunderstanding or a myth that I could never really live up to, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
And, I think about the how hard you had to work and how, the unrealistic standard that was set for you. I mean, to a degree that, it borders on abuse, honestly. If
Oh
not
yeah.
if not being abuse, I don't want to define your experience for you, but
It was abusive.
mhm,
Let's put it.
right,
So I'll separate the person or the situation and just say the situation was abusive.
right, and traumatizing
And
to you.
and my parents are different now, so
Hmm.
they're not they they're not as conservative as they were before. Um,
Hmm.
but it even took a lot of work for them to realize that they were even doing something wrong, because, or even realizing that they had ability privilege.
Right. Right.
And
And they were setting a standard for you that was you were not able to meet through no fault of your own, not for a lack of trying.
right.
And they were not willing to set that standard for themselves or have the same level of expectation for themselves. But because of that ability privilege, they were also completely unaware of what they were doing in a lot
Right.
of ways. They thought they were doing the right thing for you,
Mm.
instilling this work ethic. And that's where, when you have somebody who has such a difficult time even sort of seeing the forest for the trees, seeing the reality of the situation that they're in, you know, we have this conversation all the time now about the different forms of privilege. And the privilege is that you don't ever even have to be aware that you have it. It's not something that you ever have to think about.
and even even the doubt that exists that, oh, your disability is not real, or it's not as severe as, like, it's a and this is something that was perpetuated for years, where, oh, you have a mild disability. So
Right.
that was a so it was always, well, no, your disability is mild, so everything that you do and everything that you do wrong is not about your disability. It's about your shortcomings or what you didn't do, or
Right.
and so even that suppression, and I think that overall uh, for my family, or for my parents, were something active, where they wanted to suppress it for their own reasons, and to make it easier for them. So,
Mm-hmm.
and me conforming to those standards made things easier for them. Now, not that they didn't do the right thing, but when it came to operations or physical therapy or other things, when I when I was often one on one with them, they I would get yelled at and reprimanded for not doing enough therapy. Not to, well, how could grown, and even now thinking, how could you understand what therapy really is
Right.
if you don't even know, if you haven't even done it yourself?
Right.
And like the level of effort so it and then again, it going and you and I have also talked about the medical and social model, where the medical model, things need to be fixed or things need to be remedied.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is remedy this, as opposed to accept it, deal with it, and
Right.
so
Create a
that,
world within which it can fit and thrive and, have what it
right.
needs to, be celebrated.
Hmm. And I can remember repeatedly, even at home, like falling down the stairs getting yelled at for falling down the stairs, where it was my fault. And so not only did that anxiety build up within me, but that was also combined with their anxiety of me falling down the stairs, damaging their house, and like you um, and and not and them being concerned more about taking me to the emergency room or damaging the coffee table.
Right.
And um and so yeah, it so that's
So how are you not filled with rage?
it's I am filled with rage a lot of the but it's but a lot of and so and I'll use the example of the therapy balance bars, where you when you have the bars around you that you use to go to walk, and um, and the way I think about society now is like, what resistance is there that exists in society, and can I really push through it? Can I, because of the pandemic, can I really do, like, other people now understand what it is to be isolated, and the just that understanding of how what the world's issues, they're so layered and so big that it's almost impossible for me to push against it, but I can use that power to build myself up, and um, not change the system necessarily, but strengthen myself, because it's like doing therapy up against the wall. I'm never gonna push the wall over.
Right.
I physically can't do it, and believe me, I've tried for 40 years.
Right, but the more you push against it, the stronger you become, the more you learn how to, navigate the wall.
Yeah, and
right.
I haven't climbed up the wall yet, but I'm working on that with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Yeah, so but
well, I hear you. I mean, I still, and this is where I really struggle, because there's this very delicate dance
mm-hmm.
around, empowerment and encouraging people to become stronger and to improve their mindset and their personal strength, and and also recognizing that there are so many walls, and there's only so strong a single person can become, and there's only so much I believe there's only so much personal responsibility that one individual should be expected to muster. Sometimes those barriers are prohibitive and oppressive and unfair, and while I admire and respect personal growth and development, I can't help but, feel very sort of like, every time I say, yes, build yourself up, become more adept at pushing against that wall, and fuck the wall, excuse me, right? Like, the wall shouldn't be there. And, how do we make the wall less oppressive? And so there's always this like push pull for me personally, because some walls shouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm. And I think of it as situations. How much do you adapt to a system, and friends, I have this discussion with friends a lot of the time where is a wooden ramp good enough while you're building a concrete ramp? And the argument against that is that, well, if people put up a wooden ramp, the wooden ramp is good enough. And so you'll get more resistance from, well, that's enough.
Right.
We provided, but that ramp is not permanent. So, and and I and depending on the situation, I come down on different sides of that because it's either the ramp is going to be wooden or it's going to be concrete. And if you don't at least have the wooden ramp, you have some progress and notice, or not necessarily applaud, but appreciate that progress or appreciate that understanding. And that, but it goes along the same lines of, well, how much, if someone also wants to change, how long do they have to change if they're uh, if they're 30 or 40 years older than you? How much grace do you give them? How much time do you give them before? And so that's a hard question too, because of the fact that, well, they should have changed. They should have changed with the ADA. Things would have been so much easier if they just would have been like, oh, okay, the ADA changed. Now we're going to be completely supportive and understand your situation. And
If
but
only that would happen. When policy changes, minds immediately change and everyone's, happy and evolved.
hmm and so it's just a and that's why I talk about the version and the verses and versions of, there's always going to be resistance, but there's always the chance or the opportunity for progress. So
Mm-hmm.
and the version of yourself or of me is what is today, but it can be better tomorrow, and it'll be
Mm-hmm.
a different version. It'll be the July 20 July 4th version of myself in 2021. Hey, if it's good enough for computers and software packages and Microsoft and Apple, it's good. It's an apple a day keeps the doctor away. That's so.
No, but I think that that's a really it's a really interesting sort of, and I love the way that you do that. You are able to distill things down and use language and sort of this visual interpretation of things to kind of help distill down the idea, which is really that we're always evolving, and some versions of ourselves and the world that we live in are better than others. Sometimes it's what's that Windows XP, the one that had all the issues. Was that what the one, or it was Windows 10 or something? One of them was very glitchy and had a
Yeah.
lot of problems. And even though it was technically more evolved than the previous version, it it had it wasn't good.
People wanted to go back to Windows 95. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, I think that you're absolutely right. That we keep evolving, and some of those evolutions are, better than others.
And I think so much of it comes down from confidence to capacity to competence. And I think those three areas specifically are, at least personally, and within someone, what their belief systems are. And if they don't have enough confidence in what they're even thinking, or if they don't know anybody else uh,
Mm-hmm.
that is in a similar situation. I grew up with 500 kids that didn't have cerebral palsy.
Right.
It wasn't that I was the only one. It was I was the only. Everybody else didn't have uh, cerebral palsy, didn't have crutches, and even I'll give an example. Yesterday, so I met someone from Rochester, New York. She's a speech and language pathologist, and she also um, has cerebral palsy and walks with crutches. But and she grew up in the 70s, but her experience was that she got all the support in school, and when she went into adaptive physical education, they hired someone to specifically help her. They hired a adaptive physical education teacher.
Right.
And so the one of the things that we were even talking about last night was, well, do you dream with your crutches or without your crutches? And I'm like, well, yeah, in my dreams I have crutches. And she's like, how do you have? I'm like, that's just how, and just having the conversation with her. Okay, it's not right or wrong, but just to have someone else that can understand from a high level what. So, if I had someone like her um, that I went to school with, or that I where we had a couple of differences in our background, but it was basically the same. There was another example of where she was buying a pair of crutches, and she was like, "Oh well, I don't want to get the orange ones or the pink ones because I don't want to stand out." And I
Mhm.
I immediately said, "I'm like, Molly, the when you buy crutches, you'll stand out no matter what color you get." And she but she didn't even think about that. And so even having that level of understanding from other people, it was helpful. And probably the most help that I got in school was by one of my English teachers in seventh and eighth grade, who she had a son with Down syndrome, so she understood from a very basic level the differences. Even though it was Down syndrome and cerebral palsy,
Right.
there was a lot of common things going on even in society where she understood a lot of the resistance that I was going through.
Mhm. And that there is accommodations are required, even though the accommodations may be different. It sounds like where you came from, no one even acknowledged that accommodations should be a thing.
Mm-hmm. And accommodations many times, unless it was about stairs or about not slipping and hurting myself because they were mopping the floors, which they had to do, and
Sure.
those were the only accommodations they had to make, and any other accommodations they sometimes saw as a threat because they had to change the system, or they had to change the way that they had to do what they were doing. And
Right.
so even me articulating what I needed when I'm getting resistance, a lot of it nonverbal even, and um, from or intimidation either from other kids or teachers, or and again it's the time. It was the time. I don't hold any animosity toward any of my teachers or any of the situations, because that's the fishbowl that we grew up in at the time, and that's the environment we had to deal with, because um, you had to follow authority because the authority knows best. And so and I what I what I talk to a lot of parents now about is being careful of using authority versus fostering versus taking other roles, and being careful of how you're applying pressure. So being collaborative, being fostering, being authoritative, and how even using that power with language and applying the language to the situation. If a parent or even a sibling, if they're more fostering, or then it's not authoritative. If they're more collaborative, it's it's more. If they're more mentoring, it's not about using the power. It's not about using the power. It's not about using the opposition, the verses. Um, and that's where I find a lot of the issues come in, where there's a, you're just seen as a threat to the existing system. And as soon as you're seen as a threat, people either shut down, or they um, they respond so powerfully that they try to overwhelm or intimidate.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting sort of way to present the information about, um, in particular with parents, because we've talked here about, sort of shame-free parenting or parenting without shame. I mean, hey, let's talk about doing everything without shame. Let's just talk about that not being a tool anymore. I think that, again, it's the water that we swim in. So oftentimes people do not know that, that's what that is, that authoritarian drive toward, um, you know, bigger, better, faster, stronger. You're not working hard enough. You're strong. You're tough. You can do this. Push through. Undermines the experience of the child. In general, I think that is true. But obviously, when the child is living with and learning to navigate having a disability, that's an additional factor
Mm-hmm.
that that has to be taken into account. And there is that, I know, and I am certain that your parents had it as well, even though generational and cultural and all of those factors, probably um, emboldened them to use shame and retribution and aggression as tools that were unnecessary and ineffective. I know that comes out of love and fear, and that weird combination of love and fear that happens when you are a parent. And being able to present this information to parents in a way that they can hear and understand and accept. And, as a child and family therapist, I frequently am met by parents who feel very defensive and very much as if, when I'm trying to collaborate with them for the needs of their child, they take that as me saying, you've done something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or you failed as a parent. And, much as you were saying earlier, you can only meet people where they are. You can
Right.
only be in the system as it exists in
Mm-hmm.
this moment and do what you can to continue to present information and push against a wall to the degree that it's effective. But parents, not just parents, everybody, we don't realize how much shame is used
Mm-hmm.
as a tool for compliance.
and and that's one of the things that is it's easiest to do in a lot of ways, because then
Mm-hmm.
if someone complies, they follow along. It becomes easier.
Right.
And there's less stress on the family because of that. So it makes sense from a high level, um, and or a surface level, but the deeper you get into it, and especially with abuse or other things or issues that other people get into, or being taken being taken advantage of,
Mhm.
in situations. That's all part of compliance too. It's not about being bullied. It's about being taken advantage of. It's about not knowing your value as someone in society, as
Right.
not knowing your value in a project, not knowing your value at your job, where you're just where your boss is able to just give you things and then make you, if you don't do this, you're a bad, or you're not living up to your, well, you know, you gave me things that you weren't, and you didn't support me, and you didn't mentor me, and you didn't do,
Right.
and there's all these layers to, um, and that all comes from the shame, and but uh, even from an age standpoint, you have people who are 10 or 15 years older than you. They uh, they go to the same church, or they go to the grocery store, and they expect, because you're younger, just that they're going to follow what you're going to follow what they say, because they're older, because you're supposed to respect the elders. And and but it comes from a good place theoretically, but when it's used in a way that is for compliance purposes, it then can get twisted in a way that doesn't make sense, or is even negative. And a
Right.
lot a lot of the ways that I even try to take away some of the shame and blame for parents with kids with disabilities, because I'll get questions from parents saying, well, what am I supposed to tell my child about what it means religiously, or what it means financially, or what it means politically, what it means emotionally, that they have a disability? And the answer that I go to now is, you don't necessarily need to have an answer, but just have the attitude that we're going to figure it out together. And that, um, even if my parents had that kind of attitude, where they weren't trying to figure out what the answer was, or try to um, fill a glass, uh, because they had that expectation of what it was, and but know what it was when they found the answer,
Right.
when they realized that what it could be, or uh, and me and my family a lot of times still get into a discussion about the uh, whether it's my responsibility alone to deal with my disability, or whether it's a family responsibility. And there are people within my family that think that it's my responsibility alone, and I remind them routinely that I didn't get this by myself. This didn't. This happened historically, family history. There's other things that play, but not not everyone in my family wanted to acknowledge that stuff.
Right.
Uh, and but one of the ways that I try to deal with the uh, Declaration and independence is even with articulation. And I love the word articulate, and articulation, and because art, and then tick, And then if you don't follow the design or how you're thinking about it while you're doing it during the timing process, you'll end up being late in a project or in whatever you're doing. And then it becomes a version of that. So even following that one word, and we already talked about declaration, but articulate and designing and thinking about how things are designed, and then the timing and worrying about being late or on time, and even using those something that simple as a word, I also use as a process. And the one of the other tools that I use, because I might as well share as many practical and tactical tips as I can, comes from the uh, computer science customer service and with Dell and other companies where it's the picnic principle, which is process in chair or problem in chair, not in computer. So when there's
Oh.
user error, um, because people don't understand that how StreamYard works or how Facebook works or how their Wi-Fi works and why their Wi-Fi is off for 15 seconds or why the video is off like earlier in this conversation. And so, but if people understand that it's their user error or not really knowing what they need to know and building up their capacity, knowing that it's not the computer, knowing that it's the communication or the understanding from the other side. And so that's that's one way to build up the emotional intelligence piece of using self-management and social management with emotional intelligence.
Have you always done that with words? Like since you were a kid?
I've always tried. I haven't always been successful, but a lot of I didn't always speak it. I wrote about it, and um, because I couldn't speak for so long, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because of either intimidation or other things that were going on, I was always thinking about words and how words are connected. Like I'll tell you a quick joke. What um, what's the what's the one thing you can do between hello and jello? Um, and I'll give you about 5 seconds to think about it, and you can you can be Danny Aiello and do the right thing.
Nice. So,
um,
intimidation kept you from using your voice. And so, as a result of that, you spent a lot of time in your early life internally.
in my own head, yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So,
and
what helped you find your voice, Rob?
what helped me to find my voice, one thing, especially in Richmond, was Doc Gibbs from our town,
Hmm.
and the I think that I might, but uh, the empower. There's a line we did our town together it, around 5 years ago now, and there's a line in our town that says there's a there's a privilege or purpose to the struggle, and
Hmm.
own it. It's about owning or enjoying the struggle. And before before that, I didn't even realize it. I was like, well, no, you're not supposed to enjoy the struggle. And then I was like, Well, no, but you can embrace you can embrace the struggle, um,
Right.
and so
Mm.
it's um, and I'll give you another simple example. This is probably why I couldn't articulate as much when I was a kid, was that so many different operations were going on inside my head and inside my body that articulation was the last piece. So I could move and I could hear stuff, but I couldn't. It was the articulation was the most complicated piece, and I could think about it, but I couldn't articulate it because there were so many other physical things that I was figuring out, and being in a class of 30 or being in a situation of 100 people in a public place, I had to worry about safety over um, being over articulating or even
Right.
knowing what I wanted and being able to talk about it. And um, so, um, and even feeling isolated and being the only one that went through it. Uh, there was a camp in New York similar to Crip Camp. They um, the one uh, the one time that I remember from it was Camp Joanio that was similar to Crip Camp, and um, they did a James Bond spoof and in a play, and the guy who wrote it was the music director, and one of the names that he came up with was more or less, um, and so and that was just the way. So his appreciation for language, I that's probably one of the earliest memories that I have
Right.
of realizing that language in itself can be manipulated, can be turned around, can be twisted like a balloon animal, which another physical therapist who actually was a clown as his night job. He actually came to camp a couple times and performed as a clown doing balloon animals, and I was like, that's really. I'm wondering if I can do that with words, and so I started to dissect and really think about words and how words can be used in different ways. I think one of the words that you're familiar with is when I say the word fierce. A lot of people think FIERCE. When I think about fierce, I think about FEARCE, because fear is in the word fierce.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's not grammatically correct, it still works.
Right.
And if it still works, but if it doesn't follow all the rules, but it still works, why does it not? Uh, it and I'll give you another word that I just thought of too. Uh, Conformula. Um,
Okay.
so
Conformula. Yes.
so it, rather than rather than rather than just conforming, like why don't other people in a group just come up with their own conformula, their own standard operating procedures?
Yeah.
And the word doesn't exist. Maybe the only other person that I know that can do this, maybe the way I can, is Stephen Colbert, and we know that he's done had a couple of words in the dictionary added to the dictionary. But it's that kind of wordplay that um, that's just fun to me, and it sparks my curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's such a wonderful, fun part of your personality, but it also speaks to your depth and the conformula concept is really at the foundation, Rob, I mean, based on what I know about you and about what you've said here today, is sort of at the foundation of what your, formative experiences were, which is, in an environment that expected you to conform whether it made sense or not, expected you to conform whether it was reasonable to expect it. And also, so often we see in our systems, very often in schools, but also in the criminal justice system and things like that, where there is so much rigidity, so much of that, this is the way that it's always been done, this is how things are, this is what you're supposed to do. Well, no, when you're met with this, you do this, and that's just the way it is.
It's
And
the expected result.
right. And so
Um,
having, that sort of conformula idea, the idea that, if it works, what does it matter? If it gets
right.
you to, the outcome, or if the outcome is different, but, the process is being followed for whatever, you know, who cares if it
Mm.
works, if you feel good about it, if the team is okay with it, and I just, as we come to a close, I think that something you just said was a few minutes ago was so important, for parents and teachers and professionals, and all humans, but the people who provide the support, who also have ability privilege, um, and all the other forms of privilege as well, is that you were talking about what your experience is or was, which was as a child, you were so
I think you froze. Okay, while we wait for Erin to come back or come back into the studio, I'm just going to mention the Cerebral Podcast, which is a podcast that I do to help parents and kids with disabilities, and hope that Erin comes back in the next 30 seconds. But in um, the Cerebral Podcast, I talk about everything from Batman from 1966 to Lou Ferrigno and the Incredible Hulk to Pole Position to being on Sesame Street, and um, but going back to what Erin said before regarding the growing up with a disability, um, it's something that I my crutches are how I navigate the world, and they uh, they really are something that they're more important to me than just the tools, but they're more an extension of me.